Hey, what's going on to all my Loki and MCU fans out there, and welcome back to my channel, Movie Files. Elliot back again with my weekly recap, breakdown, and review of the latest episode of Disney Plus Loki, Episode 5, which was titled Journey into Mystery. And I'm just going to say it right now, I personally think this was the best produced episode of a Disney show thus far. The visual effects, that score is one of the top tier MCU scores to date. And then you add in the great acting, the dialogue, the character moments, the character arcs, but also tons of Easter eggs. We're going to break it all down here in this spoiler discussion. But before we do so, do me a favor and check me out on all my other social media accounts. If you all are new to the channel, well, welcome to the community. Consider subscribing, and while you're at it, make sure you hit that notification bell. That way you can get the alert for when I drop new content. If you all enjoyed this review of Loki Episode 5, well, make sure to give the video a thumbs up. Also, share the video. It helps out the channel a lot, but also appreciate the support. And if you're watching this on the live premiere or if you're watching this on the replay, we got to talk about this episode. Let me know if you feel like this was a great produced episode. The visual effects, the score, the acting, all the Lokis, Sylvie, Mobius, Hunter B-15, Renslayer, the whole damn thing. Let me know some of the Easter eggs you all caught. Let's have a discussion about it. But also, if you're on the polar opposite, if you hated this episode, if you thought it was trash, we welcome all discussions in the comments. So let's discuss it in the comments below. So before I jump into the recap, just a friendly reminder if you all do not know, but every single Thursday, 7 p.m. Central Time, we go live, really diving deep into the latest episode of Loki, and we're going to be doing that tomorrow. Myself, Amanda, and Chris, my co-hosts, will be diving into this episode, but we always love to bring some special guests, and those guests will be Griffin from Film Speak, as well as Christine from the Party Chat podcast. You're going to want to tune in. We also might have one more special guest that I can't announce quite yet. We have to work out their schedule, but they may be joining us as well. But nonetheless, we're going to have a fun time, and I hope to see you all there. Also, just a quick plug, if you haven't already, check out my spoiler-free review of Black Widow, which will be coming to theaters this Friday as well as on Disney Plus. But also make sure your bell notifications are turned on, because on Friday I will be releasing, I believe it was almost 40-minute spoiler discussion about this Black Widow film, the Easter eggs, what worked, what didn't work, the future of the MCU. It's a great discussion. You're going to want to check out that video. So all of that being said, we have an epic review to go over here and recap and break down of episode 5 of Loki, which again was titled Journey into Mystery. And just my quick thoughts, again, I really do feel like the production of this episode was flawless. The visual effects were great. I've always been kind of iffy about the visual effects of the show so far. It just feels like there were actors just placed in front of green screens. But this episode, I felt like I was transported into the void, and just the camera angles. I can't speak highly enough about the score of this show. This is easily top tier scores in the MCU for me. The score of this show just hits on another level. And then you give me great character moments. We get a great story for classic Loki in this episode. We get a great story for our Loki, Sylvie, Mobius. We get a great reveal. I thought this episode, I've only seen it once, but I feel like this is the best episode of Loki so far, and I really have reasons why when I get into my breakdown. But again, just let me know what you thought of this episode. If you hated it, if you loved it, let's talk about it in the comments. So let's get into the recap as we open up the show. Once again, I talk about the production. We start off with this upside down shot, this twirling shot going through the TVA, going through the elevator, going to the throne room, seeing the timekeeper's head laying there, cutting back to Loki. But just again, let's go back to that shot that they decided to open up the show with. I think that's a great way to give us as an audience, it lets us know where we are in the show, right? Everything's been flipped on its head. Loki and Sylvie working together. Mobius, his belief system being broken. The TVA being broken. There are variants that work within the TVA. So everything at this point has been flipped on its head, which I think is a great way to open up this episode. But we cut into Loki asking the variant Lokis, where are we? Who are you? As classic Loki, which, by the way, I just have to say it now. Classic MCU casting. Richard E. Grant as classic Loki was perfect. He gets his own arc in this episode, and we'll talk about him obviously, but he tells Loki, you're in the void and you're about to be lunch for the Alioth, who we'll talk about that creature here in a bit. But again, just an applause to the opening of this episode, from the score, the scope, the scale. I thought it was just fantastic. But cut to Sylvie must trust Renslayer, and we learn and we get an explanation of exactly what the void is, as we see Sylvie, who is questioning Renslayer, as Renslayer doing her best interpretation or impersonating the Loki. She's saying everything to get out of this, right? She says, hey, What if Loki's still alive? What if we can work together again? Renslayer, I'm loving the casting of Gugu because you trust her. You love this actress, but she has some. We'll talk about her obviously in this episode, but we see Renslayer. The big thing that we get within this opening moment, and honestly throughout the episode, it's almost as if Renslayer really does believe. And I think the episode does submit that she doesn't know who's behind the curtain. She doesn't know who runs the TVA. Even, and we'll get to the scene with her in B-15, but I really do honestly think she does not know who's behind the curtain. But we have this explanation, I think a really good explanation of explaining exactly what happens when you get pruned. That was the big question last week. Where did Loki go? Where did Mobius go? Well, the void is a place where the branch realities get pruned, and it is impossible to destroy all matter. They move them to a place where the timeline, where they won't continue to grow. The timeline isn't reset, but transferred to a void at the end of time. The end of time is still being written, and the timekeepers are making it into a utopia, and nobody that goes to the void comes back. So I think this is a great way of explaining all the Easter eggs that we got within the void, seeing the Thanos chopper, seeing the, I think there was a yellow jacket from Ant-Man head in there. There was a living tribunal head there. I mean, there's so many Easter eggs riddled within this particular void. The Avengers Tower, which explains, again, when the TVA prunes someone, they go there. So, man, I would love a what if type of show, or just like a one shot of just like checking out all the Easter eggs that could be found in the void. It's just a great way to explain where all this stuff goes. So great explanation there. But Renslayer, she tells Sylvie, let's work together. Let's figure this out. And Sylvie, which again explains that Sylvie is a different Loki because she somewhat trusts Renslayer. She uses her to a certain point, right? But also, to me, it speaks to Renslayer being more of a Loki than she initially thought she was, which she might be an own variant of Loki herself, which we'll talk about my theory source in here. But back to our Lokis. The whole mantra on this void, of this planet, from Kid Loki, Boastful Loki, Classic Loki, Alligator Loki, which is so funny. You don't want to die. You have to survive. And that's the whole thing about Lokis. They are always survivors. But our Loki, he just wants answers at this point, right? They tell him that everything, obviously like Renslayer just told Sylvie, that everything that gets pruned comes to the void. And we see Boastful Loki telling our Loki that this is a living being and that it consumes energy and matter. Now, I'm not too familiar with the Alioth, but as you all can see on the screen now, this is something that comes from the comics. It is essentially something that has kind of defined and actually broke reality and can come and consume realities. And from what I also gathered in my research, and this episode has so many Kang the Conqueror references, but Kang the Conqueror actually has connections to the Alioth, which Alioth defeated Kang the Conqueror, but we know the MCU likes to remix things. Maybe Kang the Conqueror was able to tame this entity and make it its own guard dog. So again, there's a lot of Kang the Conqueror type of stuff going on in the show, but we'll talk about Kang a little bit later. But as the Lokis laugh at our Loki as he's trying to come up with a plan, and he wants to, they say, listen, we've done everything you thought of, the Tim pad, all that stuff. It's not gonna work. We just have to survive. Again, that's the whole thing about Lokis. They must survive. But in this moment, this is really cool. Speaking of Easter eggs and just really good character moments, we find out that Kid Loki is actually the king of the void, because in his world, in his timeline, he did something that our Loki and most Lokis can't do. He actually killed Thor, which when Loki finds that out, the look on his face like, whoa, you killed Thor? It's just like an eye-popping, eye-opening moment for that character. But again, I really hope we get more of Kid Loki, if it is someone that might team up with the Kid or the Team Avengers or the West Coast Avengers, or, our Young Avengers. I would love to get that Kid back because he seems to be a pretty cool character as well as a badass, because he killed Thor in his timeline, which is so cool. But speaking of Easter eggs, we at the point where they're going to underground, but we get a shot of the Thanos chopper, which, as you can see on the screen now, is something that was introduced in Spider-Man issue 39, seeing Thanos flying around his infamous chopper trying to collect a cosmic cube. So that's a cool little Easter egg. As well as on our way to the underground, we see a Thor's hammer, and we see a miniature Thor captured within a container. So again, just Easter egg after Easter egg, which I loved about this episode. But again, this episode wasn't all about Easter eggs. It's about the reveals. It's about the character moments as we catch up with a really cool character that we haven't seen in a couple weeks, and that is the return of Miss Minutes, as she is having a discussion with Renslayer, because Renslayer's like, hey, she's trying to, again, Renslayer's being a Loki at this moment. She's saying everything that she can to distract Sylvie. She's doing everything that she can to waste time. As we know, that's a very important trait to make a Loki. So we see her talking to Miss Minutes. Hey, Miss Minutes, can you retrieve the files to the beginning of time, to the beginning of the creation of TVA? And Sylvie's like, hold on, let me ask you a quick question, Miss Minutes. How about you go to the Void and go into the end of time, which it says, Miss Minutes says, well, we can't do that, right? We can't go to the end of time. Well, Renslayer's like, we'll go beyond the Void. As Renslayer's like, okay, yeah, let's go ahead and see what this looks into, as they suggest that once you meet or go past the Void, you can see who's behind all this and go past that particular timeline, because it's a new timeline that's created. So Sylvie, she got the brains, y'all. I'm really loving Sylvie, and I'm loving what she's bringing to this show. But as Sylvie has this conversation, she's like, you know what? I'm done with you, Renslayer. Let me just go ahead and get rid of you. But I love how Miss Minutes kind of steps in, and again, she even kind of knows what's going on. She's like, oh, wait. We have this spacecraft, the Void aircraft that can get you to the end of time. And we see Renslayer like, yeah, the spacecraft. And again, they're just wasting time before the Minutemen, who ultimately come into the area that they're in, which, by the way, I love that Sylvie took her to the trial area, the courtroom, because obviously that's a callback to when Sylvie was captured as a kid. So I love that kind of connection there. But Renslayer, she ultimately lies to her. She doesn't want to help her out. She's still kind of having her own thing where she wants to get rid of this variant in her eyes, but she also has her own mission. She does want to learn who's behind the scenes. So we see that they're not going to be working together. At this point, you know, we see that Sylvie's hiding behind the judge counter, and the Minutemen are about to take her out. But Sylvie, this is yet again a great character moment, and this shows you how awesome this character is and how smart and intelligent this character is. We see Sylvie ultimately, she prunes herself because she has her TemPad now, and she knows that if we can figure out what's beyond the Void, we can figure out who is the puppet master behind all of this stuff. So again, a great moment for Sylvie there, and just an awesome moment in general. But let's go back to Loki story time. As we see boastful Loki telling his stories. Again, he's very boastful. He's lying, right? He says that he was able to conquer Iron Man and Captain America, and all the other Lokis are like, yeah, okay, guy, you've done that, right? And we see, he says that he collected all of the 6 Infinity Stones, and then we see the alligator Loki gets upset with him, and we find out that the alligator Loki was, the reason he was pruned was because he ate a wrong cat. Again, this episode was just bonkers and crazy, and a lot of mysterious stuff, and just some wacky stuff that I really enjoyed in this episode. But this was a great moment here. This was a story I really wanted to hear. As Loki says, hey, I want to know what happened to you, classic Loki, as we get his explanation and his whole kind of arc and where he comes from, and the way Richard E. Grant delivers these lines as he tells our Loki, you know, everything in my timeline went according as planned, went exactly the way it was supposed to play out. As he talks about, he faked his own death, because we see this classic Loki, older Loki, has all the tricks of the trade, right? And we'll talk about his moment at the end here, but he says that he faked his own death, and that he had like a Luke Skywalker moment where he Luke Skywalkered himself and put himself in self-isolation on an island, but he got lonely. He wanted to see if, you know, Odin, Thor, if he was missed, but unfortunately when he tried to go back to Asgard, that's when the TVA captured him. And this is where he says that Lokis are gods of outcasts, which again speaks to the whole theme and whole thesis of the show: self-love, knowing who you are, embracing who you are, making some changes to who you are to be the best version of yourself. So again, a really great story and a really good background from our classic Loki, performed beautifully by Richard E. Grant, as Loki gives a very motivating speech at this point in this episode, where he's talking about how Sylvie's different, how they're going to take down the TVA, and that they're going to kill this shark in the sky, the Alioth. But we see he tries to recruit the other Lokis, and they just laugh him off at this point. So our Loki's like, you know what, I'll just do it myself, as Thanos says, right? Fine, I'll do it myself. As he makes his way out of the bunker underground, he comes across President Loki, which I haven't read that comic, but from kind of hearing about it, it seems pretty interesting about this President Loki whose whole pain is to lie. So it seems really interesting, but I love that Tom Hiddleston's playing double duty, giving in double time, playing our version Loki and this President Loki. Such a great moment there. But let's go back to Sylvie, who is now making her way to the Void as she awakens in this bar, and she gets attacked by the Alioth. But in getting attacked, she's able to slightly connect and link to the Alioth, and that's where she kind of sees, she goes through space and time, and she sees this castle, which we'll talk about at the end here. But it just again shows you the power scale that the Lokis possess. If you can get all the Lokis on one page, whew, that would be, which again, I've been saying Kang the Conqueror, but what if we're looking at the big bad villain behind the show is like an actual, like the most powerful Loki across all universes who may be working for a Kang the Conqueror, which would be a very low-key type of thing to do. As I kind of digress, is kind of thinking about it, just thinking of how our Loki was the Avengers' main threat, right? But he was a puppet to the puppet master Thanos. So what if the whole show we have this king, all Loki, all being Loki, who's being controlled and was bargain with Kang the Conqueror? I don't know. We'll talk about that theory. I'll kind of think about it as I kind of recap everything, and we'll get back to that a little bit later. But as we see her being attacked by the Alioth, we get our man back, who is Mobius. He's in a car, very come with me if you want to live kind of Terminator moment there. But we get a really cool another Easter egg as they're driving through this, as we see this pyramid, which, again, if you're familiar with Kang the Conqueror, he goes back to the, he took over the Egyptian times and all that stuff. So another little Easter egg to maybe point towards Kang the Conqueror being behind all this. But let's go back to President Loki, who betrays everyone. And Loki's, we know that they betray one another. They betray the people that trust him the most. As we see, boastful Loki betrays his friends, classic Loki, Kid Loki, Alligator Loki, and then ultimately President Loki betrays them because he wants to be the king of all the land. We see Lokis doing what Lokis do best. They betray one another. So we're seeing all the Lokis fighting one another, while our Loki is just like, I just want to get out of here. I want to go back to TVA and get back to Sylvie. As we see classic Loki, Kid Loki, Alligator Loki, and our Loki, again, just showing you the power scale that classic Loki has. He pretends to be in the fight, but he creates this portal that they go into to escape all the madness for our Lokis going at one another. So just showing you how powerful Lokis can be, and especially showing you the true nature of what Lokis think of themselves to be. And then it's in that moment that classic Loki, he decides to help our Loki, but it's in that moment that he sees I want to do better. It's because he says we're animals, we're just destined to destroy each other, kill one another. But I think it's at that moment, very similar to Mobius, very similar to Loki, very similar to Sylvie. All these characters in the show, B-15, C-20, even Renslayer, probably in next week's finale, they all have this moment where they think that they're on this path of just our Loki, for example, Loki, a path of destruction, a path of lies, a path of deceit. But we see at this moment that classic Loki says, you know what, I want to derail from that path. He's already derailed from that past with his self-isolation, but I think that was a great moment for that character to kind of come to realization, his glorious purpose, which we'll talk about, his great moment towards the end. But speaking of great moment, we get two characters that share the screen for the first time, and they talk about means to an end, and this is where Mobius and Sylvie have their first conversation, which was just everything I imagined it to be, plus some. They had a great conversation about, again, what they have done to this point in their life to get them to this point, right? Mobius has done all the things, kidnapping kids and doing things that he thought was right. Sylvie killing people to survive, all that stuff. So they kind of come to agreements, and they come to this idea that they have to attack the Alioth in order to make it off of the void. So again, I love that scene between those two actors, between those two characters. Again, they kind of realize what they've done in their lives to get them to this point, that they want to erase that and again create a new path. So great character stuff in this episode. But seeing the Alioth in action, we see another little cool Easter egg. This reminds me so much of DB Cooper explaining where they went when he hijacked that plane. But we get 173 USS Eldridge Philadelphia experiment. We see what happened to them. You can look it up in regards to what is this whole theory and this whole conspiracy, what happens to that USS Navy ship. But it's a really cool way of, again, this show rewrites history, which is just so cool. But this was a great moment here. Time for a friendly reunion. We get Loki, Sylvie, and Mobius. They're seeing each other for the first time. They're happy to see each other, but they come up with a plan. But again, I just want to go back to just seeing all three of those characters on the same page, which is so great for those characters. Again, just think about when we first get Loki meeting Mobius, how we saw Mobius, how they saw each other, when Sylvie meets Loki, and vice versa. It's just so great to see these characters, again, just like the episode showed, flipping itself on its head. So just a great moment. But this is where Sylvie comes up with the plan that she wants to enchant the Alioth. So great episode so far. Going back to Renslayer as she's talking to B Hunter 15, they have a conversation. B15, she's kind of taunting Renslayer at this point because she's saying that, oh, you want to know who's behind this. You don't believe in the TVA. You just find out your whole life has just been turned upside down and you want to know who's behind the curtain. But you know what? Sylvie's going to figure it out because you want it, she needs it. Really great line there. And I really hope that Wumi Mushaku makes it out of this show and gets more screen time because she's such a great character. But I just love that moment that she gets there. And that line was fantastic. But we see Miss Minutes giving Hunter, or I should say Renslayer, all the files of the creation of the TVA. So I think by next week, she's going to learn more about who's behind the scenes, and she might find out that maybe a boyfriend of hers is behind all this. We'll see what comes in next week. But as we kind of wrap up this episode, as I have in my notes here, what now? So we see Mobius having another great discussion with classic Loki and Kid Loki about telling the truth. And when he arrives at TVA, he's going to burn it all to the ground. And it's time for him to make a change, which again, we're seeing classic Loki starting to get the seeds in his head. Okay, it's time for change, glorious purpose. But also, I think it was important for Kid Loki to hear that too. Even though he stays on the Void, I think if we inevitably see that character again, we're going to see a different version of Kid Loki, which again, I can't believe he killed Thor. But going on to Sylvie and Loki, another great moment between two characters as they're talking about their friendship. It's not a romance, as I talked about in the live stream. I don't think they're in love with each other like romantically and sexually, but they just have a bondship, a friendship between these two characters. As we see Loki kind of being selfish, conjuring up a blanket, but he ultimately gives the blanket to Sylvie. And this is, like I said, they have a friendship, because it was so sad to hear Sylvie say, I don't really know what a friend is, what it means to have a friend, but now she has someone that she can trust in our Loki. Really great moment for those two characters as they agree to, once all this is over, maybe they can figure something out and work together, which I hope we get that. But if you watch movies and shows, sometimes when characters say things like that, it's almost like the kiss of death. So either our Loki is going to be killed next week, or Sylvie's going to be killed, but I don't know if they're going to get that happy ending of them coming together and creating this new timeline of happiness between the two characters. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. But let's wrap it up. Time to find the truth. As Kid Loki and Classic Loki, they initially say they're going to stay there. This is where their home is. This is where they have grown to learn to survive. So Kid Loki stays there, but again, Classic Loki has some other things on his mind, but we see Kid Loki give our Loki a sword, a weapon that he's going to use, and I love that moment there. But we see our Mobius, he's going back to TVA to burn it all down, but before he goes into that portal with the TemPad, he gives Loki a hug, and they say that they're friends. What a great moment for those two characters as they say their goodbyes for now. I think Mobius will be seeing Loki in the future. We'll see. But let's wrap up the episode. Sylvie, Loki versus the Alioth. As Loki is creating a distraction, he's sacrificing himself, because at this point they're not winning against the Alioth. But this is where classic Loki has a change of heart, has his glorious purpose. He creates the biggest distraction and he recreates Asgard, showing you the powers that a Loki can possess. Such a great moment for a big grand performance moment. Like I said, I care so much for the character, seeing him get his glorious purpose, seeing him sacrifice himself for something greater than himself. Such a great moment. For Loki to see that just really kind of shows you, I can make a change. I can do differently. What a great moment. But as we wrap up, we see Sylvie and Loki working together. I always said that I think by the end of the show, if Loki does make it out of the show, which I think he will, he's going to possess new powers. He now is teaming up with Sylvie, and now he knows how to enchant something. So they work together. They ultimately do enchant the Alioth, and they see through the Alioth, they both open up their eyes, and they can see this castle, which we're assuming the person behind all this madness, Kang the Conqueror, King Loki, another character in his entirety. We're hopefully going to meet them next week as the episode wraps up. What an incredible episode again. The Kang the Conqueror stuff, the only thing with me with Kang the Conqueror not being like presented in the show is, again, it's Disney Plus. You want to see Jonathan Majors as Kang the Conqueror for the first time on the big screen, in my personal opinion. But at the same vein, what a way for Disney Plus to say, if you want to be a part of this MCU journey, you got to watch these shows, because you're going to get reveals like Kang the Conqueror. So we have that going there, because again, the show is just riddled with Kang the Conqueror references, Easter eggs, all the different stuff that we've seen with every single episode. But we'll see what comes of that character. But I also think it's very cool to see that literally last week, Jonathan Majors got a Kang the Conqueror comic, signed his name in that comic book store. So I don't know if that's a coincidence, but again, just thinking about Kang the Conqueror, we know the MCU, they always like to remix things. So even though we might be getting all the Kang the Conqueror type of Easter eggs and references, it might just be, they might give all that story to a president, or not a president, but a King Loki. But again, I think that King Loki, very similar to the Power Broker, Sharon Carter, there's someone working behind the scenes. If we'll get that character next week, only time will tell. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, if you stuck around to the end of this review here, I appreciate you all. Make sure, if you haven't already, to like the video, share the video, leave your thoughts in the comments, your thoughts, your theories, your predictions for the weeks ahead. Again, I can't applaud enough the writing in this episode, the acting, the score, the visual effects were just really top-notch, top-tier MCU in my personal opinion. So again, thank you all for watching the review. Again, we'll be live tomorrow, 7 p.m. Central Time. Myself, Amanda, Chris, Griff, and Christine, and maybe one more other special guest will be joining us. And again, keep an eye out for my spoiler review coming for Black Widow. But in the meantime, check out my spoiler-free review. Hope you all enjoyed this review, and we'll see you all on the next video.